In today's episode, we're looking at 6 athletes that died in the most horrific ways. From a pole vaulter whose fiberglass pole shatters mid-flight in the air, to a cyclist where a small bump in the track at over 43 miles per hour changes everything in the most unexpected way. It was August 17th, 2016, and the bright afternoon sun illuminated a packed athletics stadium near the waterfront in Tarragona, Spain, during a late-season international track meet. Spectators filled the stands as athletes warmed up for the men's high jump qualifying rounds. Marcus Thompson was 24 years old and worked as a personal trainer in Toronto. He earned an invitation to compete in his first international meet after setting a new personal best of 7 feet 5.75 inches during the trials earlier that summer in his city, beating the previous record that had stood for 9 years. His mother had been diagnosed with terminal cancer 6 months earlier, and he dedicated his international debut to her memory. His coach later described him as someone who worked harder than anyone in the gym and inspired his teammates with his unwavering determination. The group of 20 high jumpers had several certified meet officials overseeing the event. Heavy rain earlier that morning had created wet patches around the landing areas. This made the grounds crew inspect all surfaces and add extra matting in certain zones. The crew worked methodically, checking traction along the approach and placing temporary edge padding where runoff had collected, aware that athlete safety depended on their thoroughness. Before the jump started, the head official gathered all competitors for a briefing. He explained that certain approach lanes had yellow markers because the track surface was still damp. He told the athletes they must adjust their run-ups carefully and watch the mat boundaries during competition. The officials emphasized the importance of maintaining proper technique and awareness given the challenging conditions. Thompson started his approach from the marker 59 feet from the bar. He accelerated steadily as he covered the distance toward the takeoff point. His stride remained steady through the approach, and witnesses described his posture as controlled and deliberate as he prepared for takeoff, his gaze fixed on the bar. The bar was set at 7 feet 5 inches for this attempt, well within his capability range. Thompson planted his takeoff foot at the spot he'd calculated and drove his knee upward while rotating his body toward the bar. His execution appeared flawless as he went over the crossbar successfully, clearing it with minimal contact. But the damp approach subtly altered his takeoff angle, carrying him slightly off-center as he descended. His body shifted away from the center of the mat as he descended. His shoulder hit the edge of the foam surface, while his head and neck extended beyond the padded area. Thompson made contact with the firm synthetic track surface surrounding the landing mat. His body went limp upon impact with the hard surface. Medical personnel reached him in 35 seconds. They found him unconscious with bleeding from his ear and mouth. His breathing came in short, irregular patterns. The emergency team immediately stabilized his neck and radioed for an ambulance while assessing his injuries. The competition stopped right away. Officials moved other athletes back while medical staff worked on Thompson. Spectators in the nearby sections stood silently as they understood the severity from the urgency of everyone's movements. Thompson was transported to the hospital within 20 minutes. Neurosurgeons performed emergency surgery to address severe brain trauma. However, he died 8 days later. Following the incident, organizers revised perimeter padding placement and wet surface competition protocols at future international meets, adding additional safety zones around landing mat edges. It was August 3rd, 2021, and thick, humid air hung over a large indoor athletics stadium in Clermont-Ferrand, France, during a late-season international pole vault final. Workers adjusted landing pits, while officials conducted last-minute inspections, moving methodically along the runway as athletes completed their warm-ups under the arena lights. Jean-Marc Dubois, a 28-year-old physical education teacher from Marseille, had earned his invitation after clearing 18 feet 8 inches earlier that summer, a personal best that pushed him into the international field for the first time. His progress had been gradual, shaped by disciplined training and careful technical refinement rather than sudden breakthroughs. Teammates described him as detail-oriented and loyal to familiar equipment, often holding on to poles longer than others would. During training sessions, he favored gear whose flex patterns he understood instinctively, even when newer models were available. Earlier in the day, an equipment issue during another session prompted stricter inspections across the competition area. Officials checked grips, fiberglass shafts, and manufacturer ratings, flagging several poles that showed signs of fatigue. Athletes were reminded to monitor their equipment closely, and some quietly replaced older poles before the final began. Dubois, however, continued using one he had relied on throughout the qualifying rounds. The poles showed faint discoloration near the grip, but nothing obvious enough to draw immediate concern. The bar was raised to 18 feet 2 inches for his third attempt at the height. Dubois stepped onto the runway, shoulders squared, eyes fixed ahead. He accelerated smoothly, building speed through his controlled strides as the pole angled forward. At the plant box, he drove the tip downward and transferred his momentum into the fiberglass shaft. The pole bent deeply under load, storing energy as he swung his legs upward and inverted his body. At maximum flex, a sharp crack echoed across the stadium. The pole fractured just below his top hand, releasing its stored energy instantly. Dubois lost control midair and dropped from roughly 14 feet above the pit. His back hit the foam first, but the force carried him off-center, and his head struck the exposed metal frame along the edge before he slid to a stop. The runway emptied quickly as officials signaled to halt the round. Teammates watched from a distance while responders moved in, kneeling beside him and securing his position without lifting him from the surface. Equipment was pulled back from the pit, and the final was suspended as the arena fell into a low murmur of uncertainty. Hospital imaging later confirmed severe spinal cord trauma that left him without motor function below the shoulders. Surgeons attempted decompression in the days that followed, but his condition worsened due to complications. Dubois died several weeks later. After the season ended, organizers revised inspection procedures, placing greater emphasis on equipment lifespan rather than visible damage alone. It was August 6, 2019, and cool conditioned air circulated through a modern indoor velodrome in Anadia, Portugal, during a late-season international track cycling final. Spectators filled the upper tiers while officials monitored the steep wooden banking from designated safety zones. The atmosphere felt controlled but tense as two elite sprinters prepared for the deciding races of a best-of-3 match sprint. Andreas Müller was 26 years old and worked as a bicycle mechanic in Hamburg. Earlier that season, he had secured a place in the international final after a strong championship performance, posting a fast-flying lap time that drew attention from experienced coaches. Teammates described him as methodical with equipment and intensely focused on aerodynamic efficiency. His preparation centered on small adjustments to body position and pacing rather than dramatic tactical changes, and he entered the final with a reputation for precise control at high speed. Officials completed routine inspections of the velodrome surface and barrier padding before the race. The wooden boards showed normal wear from several days of competition but remained within safety standards. Riders were reminded to hold their racing line through the steep turns and avoid sudden lateral movement during the sprint phase. The structure of the event rewarded tactical patience, often forcing competitors to slow dramatically before unleashing explosive acceleration in the final laps. Müller had won the opening race and needed one more victory to secure the overall win, placing additional pressure on the second sprint. When the starting gate released, both riders rolled onto the track cautiously, watching each other's positioning. Müller maintained a low line near the inner measurement band, while his opponent hovered higher on the banking. The pace remained controlled through the early lap as each cyclist tried to force the other into leading too soon. With just over one lap remaining, Müller accelerated earlier than in previous races, committing to a long sprint rather than waiting for the final straight. His opponent responded instantly, descending from the higher line to challenge for position. Within seconds, both riders reached speeds exceeding 43 miles per hour. Müller held the shortest path along the inside, his front wheel tracing dangerously close to the blue measurement band as the banking steepened. The opponent drew nearly level beside him, narrowing the space between their handlebars and limiting any margin for correction. As Müller leaned into the turn under heavy acceleration, his front wheel drifted slightly toward the inner edge of the racing surface. With the pressure of the sprint and minimal clearance between riders, the tire lost grip and the bike slid out from beneath him. Müller struck the track at full racing speed and slid upward along the wooden boards toward the protective barriers. His helmet made heavy contact with the padded wall, forcing his neck into a severe angle before he came to rest near the top of the banking. Officials immediately signaled for medical assistance while the remaining rider slowed and moved clear of the incident. Medical personnel reached Müller within seconds and initiated spinal precautions. He was unconscious with irregular breathing, and visible damage to his helmet indicated a high-energy impact. Advanced life support procedures began on the track before he was transferred to a nearby hospital for emergency treatment. Imaging revealed catastrophic head and spinal trauma despite the protective equipment. Surgeons attempted intervention, but the injuries proved irreversible, and Müller died 6 hours later. In the aftermath, organizers paused the remainder of the event and conducted a safety review of sprint protocols and barrier padding, issuing updated recommendations for future international track cycling meets. It was July 31st, 2016, and stale air filled the weightlifting hall inside a municipal sports complex in Nantes, France. Bright overhead lights illuminated the platform as athletes chalked their hands for the super heavyweight division final, while officials took positions around the competition area and medical staff stood ready at the sidelines. William Johnson was 32 years old and worked as a dock supervisor in Liverpool. He qualified to represent his country after winning the championships in April 2016. With a total lift of 1,069 pounds, the highest total in 8 years. His wife later described him as someone with unmatched dedication who mentored younger lifters generously and saw the sport as a way to transform lives. The group of 12 lifters were to participate in this competition under pressure-packed circumstances. Technical difficulties with electronic scoring earlier had caused schedule delays. This made officials compress rest intervals between attempts to get back on time. The rushed atmosphere created additional stress for athletes who relied on precise recovery periods between maximum effort lifts. Before the clean and jerk portion began, the head referee gathered the competitors for a briefing. He reminded the lifters that the platform had seen heavy use during earlier sessions, and emphasized precise foot placement and stance awareness throughout their attempts, noting that proper positioning was critical for both performance and safety. Johnson had completed his snatch lift successfully and was in third place overall. He needed to lift 562 pounds in the clean and jerk to guarantee a medal position. The mathematics were clear but unforgiving. His coach suggested opening with 545 pounds instead, explaining that a successful lighter lift would likely be enough and would carry less risk. But Johnson pushed for the heavier weight, believing that his training had prepared him for this moment and that a stronger lift would secure a better placing. The barbell was loaded with the requested plates and secured with collars. Johnson approached the platform and performed his pre-lift routine of deep breathing and neck rolls. He set his feet shoulder-width apart and gripped the bar at his measured hand positions. He initiated the lift with explosive leg drive and pulled the bar upward along his body. The weight traveled past his knees and continued rising as he extended completely. He dropped beneath the bar and caught it across his shoulders in the front rack position. His legs drove upward to complete the clean portion. He stood fully upright, with the 562 pounds resting on his collarbones and front shoulders. Referees observed his stabilization and waited for his signal to attempt the jerk. Johnson took several controlled breaths, gathering himself for the final push. He dipped his knees and exploded upward, driving the weight overhead. The bar traveled upward as he split his legs into the standard jerk position, but his back foot landed slightly off his usual line during the split. Fatigue from the rushed schedule disrupted his balance as the massive weight wavered overhead. Johnson struggled to stabilize the bar, his arms shaking from the strain. The weight shifted backward beyond his control. He tried to push the bar away from his body as he fell backward. The barbell descended toward him as he lost the battle with gravity. As he fell backward, the barbell dropped unevenly, striking his upper chest and neck before bouncing and rolling clear. Officials rushed forward immediately. Johnson remained conscious, but was in severe distress and struggling to breathe. The barbell was lifted off him within seconds. Medical personnel reached him within 12 seconds and found him with severe chest trauma and breathing difficulties. Advanced airway management was initiated. He was transported to a nearby trauma center where surgeons worked to address internal injuries. Despite extensive efforts, Johnson died later that day from complications related to severe chest trauma and airway compression sustained during the impact. The competition was suspended to review all platform surfaces and implement mandatory platform replacement schedules. Organizers introduced additional platform inspections and updated safety recommendations for future international meets. It was August 1st, 2018, and afternoon heat shimmered across the practice field in Los Angeles. Athletes moved through warm-up routines for the women's javelin qualifying session at an international athletics meet scheduled for later that day. Sarah Richardson was 22 years old and worked as a graduate student in Boulder studying exercise physiology. She earned her place at the international meet after throwing 211 feet at a national championship earlier that season, breaking through in her first year of elite competition. Her rise to international level competition had been meteoric and unexpected. Her athletic background gave her a natural throwing motion, and dedicated coaches helped her refine the technical aspects of javelin. The warm-up area accommodated 20 athletes across multiple throwing lanes with specific safety protocols in place. Competition organizers had designed the space to allow athletes adequate practice time while managing the inherent risks of throwing sharp implements in a crowded environment. Traffic flow patterns had been established to separate athletes moving between lanes from those in active throwing zones. Visual markers and designated walkways helped organize movement throughout the practice area. Before warm-up started, the field referee gathered all competitors for a detailed safety briefing. He explained that specific throwing lanes were designated for practice, and athletes must wait for clear signals before releasing implements. He emphasized that javelin carriers must hold their spears point down while moving and never walk through active throwing zones. The briefing stressed that vigilance and communication were essential for everyone's safety. Richardson moved quickly through her stretching routine as athletes rotated through the warm-up lanes around her. She adjusted her grip on the javelin while scanning the throwing zones, focused on beginning her practice attempts. She grabbed her competition javelin from her bag, the familiar weight steady in her hands. She walked toward an open throwing lane, preparing to begin her warm-up throws. Another athlete was mid-approach on the runway as Richardson crossed near the edge of the landing sector. Richardson didn't see her because she was adjusting her grip on the javelin while walking, her attention directed downward at her hand position rather than scanning the throwing zones ahead. The athlete released her throw just as Richardson crossed into the landing zone. The timing was catastrophically unlucky. The javelin traveled on its intended arc toward the designated landing area, Richardson looked up at the last second and saw the spear descending toward her. She tried to move, but her foot caught on the grass edge. The javelin struck her in the upper chest area. The force of impact drove her backward onto the ground. She remained conscious and cried out in pain and shock. The thrower saw what happened and ran toward her immediately, horrified. Other athletes shouted for medical help while forming a protective circle around Richardson. Officials reached her within 25 seconds and called for emergency medical services. The venue medical team arrived with trauma equipment and found Richardson conscious but in severe distress with a penetrating injury. They stabilized the situation and prepared her for transport, with the medical director accompanying her during transfer. An ambulance took her to the medical center where trauma surgeons were ready. Despite aggressive treatment, Richardson died 3 days later from complications related to severe internal bleeding and cardiac injury caused by the penetrating chest trauma. Javelin warm-up activities were immediately suspended pending investigation. The governing body implemented mandatory separation zones between throwing lanes and redesigned warm-up protocols with enhanced visual warning systems and dedicated safety monitors for all throwing events. It was July 9th, 2016, and humid evening air settled over a municipal athletics stadium in Milan. The setting sun cast long shadows across the field as athletes prepared for the men's shot put final. The evening session carried special significance as it would determine the medals in one of track and field's most traditional events. Thomas Anderson was 30 years old and worked as a construction manager in Boston. He earned his place at the international meet after winning a national championship with a throw of 73 feet 9 inches, his personal best and the longest throw in 5 years. His friend described him as someone with incredible mental strength and generosity who gave back to his community tirelessly, viewing the international stage as a platform to inspire others facing similar struggles he had overcome. The group of finalists had 4 experienced field judges monitoring them with extensive backgrounds in technical throwing events. Earlier that day, maintenance crews had applied a new cleaning solution to the throwing circle as part of routine preparation. The treatment slightly altered the surface texture in a way that was difficult to detect during standard inspection. Officials conducted standard pre-competition inspections but failed to detect the subtle change in surface friction. Before the final began, the head official gathered all competitors for a briefing. He reminded the athletes about proper foot placement and maintaining balance throughout the rotational movement, emphasizing that controlled technique should always take precedence over maximum power. Anderson had completed his first 3 throws with moderate success and sat in 5th place. He needed a big throw to medal, and the mounting pressure weighed heavily. His coach suggested a more controlled approach, arguing that clean execution with proper technique would be better than an overly aggressive attempt. But Anderson felt confident in his ability to execute his maximum effort technique, believing that only his best throw would produce the distance needed to reach the podium. The shot put weighed 16 pounds as per men's competition standards. Anderson positioned himself at the back of the circle with the shot tucked against his neck. He began his rotational movement across the circle, building momentum as he moved toward the toe board. His feet shuffled rapidly across the circle as he spun faster than his previous attempts. His body coiled and then exploded toward the throwing position with maximum force. But his back foot landed on the residue-affected section of concrete during the final rotation. The foot slipped sideways on the unexpectedly slick surface. His balance broke completely. His upper body continued rotating while his lower body twisted in the wrong direction. He tried to save himself by extending his arms, but the momentum was too great. The shot put slipped from his hand as his footing failed, and Anderson fell backward, striking the concrete edge of the circle with the back of his head. Officials halted the event as medical staff rushed in and stabilized him on the concrete. He was transported to a nearby hospital within minutes, where scans revealed severe traumatic brain injury. Surgeons attempted emergency intervention, but his condition worsened over the following days. Anderson died 4 days later. In the aftermath, venue staff quietly reviewed maintenance practices, introducing additional friction checks on throwing circles before future competitions resumed at the stadium. Thanks for watching. Enjoy this video. Click more.